I have to come clean about something. I am actually a big Nintendo fan. My first console was the Nintendo 64. I played many classics like Mario 64, Glover, and even Superman 64. Some real Kino stuff right there. I mostly enjoy the Big N's first-party output, from Kirby to Metroid, and I've played nearly all of the goofy little plumber's adventures. But there's one Nintendo franchise I just can't get into despite several attempts to do so. And that franchise is The Legend of Zelda. I know a bunch of you basement dwellers are probably clamoring to take my gamer card. There goes all my chances of using the gamer word now.
What a fucking nick.
But those games just never clicked with me. I liked Twilight Princess enough to finish it, but Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and even Breath of the Wild I just couldn't connect with. I don't know whether it's the setting or the gameplay. I can't say. Well, except for Breath of the Wild, I hate its crafting, I hate its combat, I hate its weapon durability, and the shrine puzzles suck. They don't really make a good substitute for the intricately designed temples in other games. I'm sorry about that. This video isn't really going to focus on Link and Zelda, but the games that Link's Adventures inspired. Games like Okami, which is like 4 of the best Zelda games stapled together in a beautiful human centipede-esque fashion, and the Darksiders series, which those games are like if Link was cool and picked up a couple moves from Kratos. Honestly, those games helped me realize that I wasn't the problem at all, it's Zelda. So let's dig into these not quite Zelda games, shall we? For the uninitiated, a Zelda game is an action game with an emphasis on puzzles and exploration, often re-exploring old areas with new tools and abilities that you unlock through the story. A lot of the big story events take place around puzzle temples or dungeons that force you to engage with special tools and abilities. I know this definition sounds fairly broad and non-specific, but when you play it, it definitely feels Zelda. And for the purpose of this video, I'm gonna focus on 2 3D Zelda-inspired games, Darksiders and Okami. Darksiders is a 2010 action title that was released on the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC. In 2016, both Darksiders 1 and 2 got remastered versions. Oh, sorry, War-mastered versions. These re-releases were to prep gamers for Darksiders 3 in 2018. The first 2 titles were developed by Vigil Games and published by THQ, both Vigil and THQ shutting its doors in 2012 due to THQ's bankruptcy. But after a couple different acquisitions, THQ was revived, and Vigil more or less reformed under the name Gunfire Games. Gunfire, headed by David Adams, the writer and one of the creative leads on the original 2 Darksiders games. The other head of Vigil, Joe Madureira, returned to his previous career as a comic book artist after Vigil's closing, and is currently working on the Battle Chasers series. Gunfire has been rather prolific since its forming, releasing the Remnant titles as well as Darksiders 3. I'm really happy to see this team come back together and create some interesting games. While I haven't played the most recent Remnant 2, I did play the first one, and I rather enjoyed it. And given the thesis of this video, you can guess I rather liked the entire Darksiders series. Honestly, 2 is my personal favorite. But with each sequel, Darksiders became less Zelda-like, adding more influence from games like Diablo and Darksiders 2, and in Darksiders 3 becoming more of a Souls-like title. While they still kept a little bit of that Zelda influence, the original Darksiders game is pretty much a straightforward Zelda clone, for better or worse. So that's why it'll be the main focus in this video. Darksiders looks like Warhammer by way of Todd McFarlane, which makes sense, having a Marvel and Image comic artist Joe Madureira behind all the designs. While I'm not much of an American comic guy, I do really dig the style. I mean, who doesn't like skulls on skulls? Some real edge. It's almost perfectly over-designed. It walks that edge of access with the skulls on everything and the angels with ornate designs and the demons looking like misshapen monsters. It's definitely a vibe for sure. More cartoony than something like Warhammer, but has a lot more edge than something that's really cartoony like Fortnite. I almost feel like it's a perfect marriage between cartoony and edgy. And whether you vibe with this aesthetic over something like Zelda really just comes down to preference at the end of the day. Some people prefer femboy Link, but us men have fury in the Darksiders fandom, and God, I'd let her do terrible things to me. And the plot of Darksiders is fine. The story is pretty much there just to drive the gameplay. It reminds me of the old John Carmack quote, Story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not important. Well, obviously Carmack never saw this masterpiece.
James.
Yes, Haley?
I'm so glad that our lemon tree finally grew.
I truly do love our lemon tree.
Just imagine, a life full of lemon trees. Hope that the whores aren't stealing our lemons. You know, those naughty whores always steal lemons.
We do have a couple lemon whores in this community.
Those damn lemon-stealing whores.
The plot is really just there to give context to the action, and not much else. You play as one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, War, which is metal as heck. And for some reason, the end times happened without someone filing the proper paperwork. The 7th seal was never broken before the armies of heaven and hell decided to indiscriminately slaughter the human race. War was essentially the one slapped with the write-up, locked in prison for a good century, eventually being dusted off and thrown back into service to kill the Destroyer, a powerful demon that emerged during this premature apocalypse. Now War, alongside of the Council's paid tattletale, aka the Watcher, voiced by Mark Hamill of all people.
Looks like our trajectory was a little off.
In your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
The two of you, hand in hand, head out to kill this demon to try to reinforce the balance that the Charred Council wants. The Charred Council being the sort of governing body over both heaven and hell, wanting a certain balance between the two, neither wanting heaven nor hell standing above the other, or any other creatures like humans or makers. And now you start your adventure. And the first thing you do is find Samael, aka Satan, locked away in a destroyed city, where he tells you to go out and find the Destroyer's 4 guardians, and he'll take you to the Dark Towers of Hell, so you can kill the Destroyer. So War goes through 4 themed dungeons with intricate puzzles to kill the bosses, that are mostly just aggressive puzzles at the end of the day. Like the Bat, where you throw inert bombs, then ignite them with your legally distinct boomerang that you found inside of the Bat's dungeon. The game structure is very Zelda-esque. You go into an enemy dungeon, you find a weapon or tool that helps you solve all the puzzles in that dungeon, kill that dungeon boss, and then that weapon or tool allows you to access different areas of the map you really couldn't get to before. Also helps you find collectibles that you couldn't reach before. The exploration is really nice, and the puzzles overall are really good. I know you little Zelda nerds in the comments are gonna say Zelda's puzzles are much better, but I think they're pretty much on par with a lot of the Zelda games. I will say the combat in Darksiders is a whole lot better than Zelda. Mostly because Darksiders is just ripping off the classic God of War combat system. You get your light attacks with your sword, and then you get a secondary weapon for your heavy attacks, as well as incorporating your puzzle solving tools into a fight, like your boomerang or your gun. Yeah, a gun. Take that with your little bow, Link. We got the gat. And honestly, me saying that this game rips off God of War's combat isn't really a slight against Darksiders, because that combat system is just really good. I almost find it kinda cute the way that Darksiders likes to cut parts out of other games that you really enjoyed and staple it together. I don't know if I can really say that the first Darksiders game especially is more than the sum of its parts, but I think it pretty much fits as a sum of its parts, and those parts are really good, because it takes not just from Zelda and God of War, but even borrows from games like Portal in some of its puzzle design. It's just a great kind of middle market experience that we don't really see in the gaming industry anymore. And as far as complaints about the game, I don't really have many. The biggest one is that the remasters aren't really that remastered. There's some weird texture bugs like War's wings disappearing, and small things like that. And the sequel's Definitive Edition having weird audio bugs that really aren't excusable in a re-release of a decade-old game. Also, the character writing isn't the best. I don't really care about War or any character in this series really. War is just this chivalrous, knight-like man fighting demons, which is cool, but as a character, is a bit boring. He doesn't really grow or change in any meaningful way, and I can kind of say that about all the horsemen that I've played in these games. They all just feel pretty flat as characters. And my final complaint is a little bit of a spoiler, so I'll put up a time code for you to skip past it, if what I've said so far has inspired you to pick up the game. Okay, to spoil this decade-old game, the ending of the first Darksiders ends on a cliffhanger where all 4 of the horsemen ride in to fight the Charred Council at the end. But none of the sequels ever follow through with that promise. All the sequels take place during War's 100-year imprisonment. In the second game, Death is trying to clear War's name, and in the third game, Fury is fighting the 7 deadly sins while War is locked away. And Darksiders Genesis is... well, I've never actually played Darksiders Genesis, but I'm guessing by the name it takes place before the rest of the games. So the first game is actually at the end of the timeline as it stands in the year of our Lord, 2024. This can be a bit frustrating for someone who really cares about the overarching narrative and the lore of the games, but the sequels slap hard, and even with these minor complaints, are worth playing. But lastly, I gotta say, the Darksiders franchise is a bit of a cockroach. It was never a bestseller by any means, and even after the studio's closure, it still lives on. Even got a teaser trailer for a new game this year at Gamescom. Hopefully we're finally getting that 4-player co-op with all the horsemen, which the thought of that just warms my cold dead heart. This franchise is one that I've always really enjoyed, and it really helped me understand the appeal of the Zelda titles. But the next game I'll be talking about is not just one of the best Zelda-like games ever made, it's probably one of the best games ever made. Okami is an action-adventure title released in 2006 on the PlayStation 2, eventually getting re-released on the Nintendo Wii, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and the Nintendo Switch, with a port on the TI-84 graphic calculator coming soon, I think. Okami was developed by the now-defunct Clover Studio. Clover was an internal team at Capcom that was helmed by the Devil May Cry creator and director of Resident Evil 2, Mr. Hideki I Will Block You Kamiya, as well as the director of Resident Evil 1 and 4, Shinji Mikami. The studio's famous for making great games that never sold well. These games are often considered classics today, like God Hand and Beautiful Joe. But due to all their games selling very poorly, the team was eventually dissolved. Much of that team went on to form Platinum Games, creating Vanquish, directed by Shinji Mikami, and Bayonetta, directed by Hideki Kamiya. Kamiya was the one that helmed Okami. Kamiya even cited The Legend of Zelda as one of his main inspirations when working on Okami, and this inspiration is extremely apparent in its design. Okami almost plays out episodically, each episode feeling like its own full Zelda game. Okami did get a sequel on the Nintendo DS that released internationally in 2011, which I sadly have never played, but it looks really good, and who wouldn't want more Okami in their life? To get a little weeby here for a second, the title Okami is actually a play on words in Japanese. Depending on how you write out the kanji, the word Okami can either mean wolf or great god, which is very apt given who you're playing as throughout the game. Okami is inspired by Japanese folklore, but often doesn't follow it very closely, which isn't a complaint because I know little to nothing about Japanese folklore. But if you're a dirty weeb like me, you'll recognize names like Susanoo, Tsukuyomi, Amaterasu, and figures like a nine-tailed fox or other yokai. Okami follows Amaterasu, the mother of all gods or gods of nature, and is just a silly little doggo at the same time. Amaterasu went into hibernation after she and a man named Nagi fought off a powerful hydra by the name of Orochi. Amaterasu, in the form of a wolf, also went by the name Shiranui, but Shiranui died during that fight, and Orochi was sealed away using Nagi's sword Tsukuyomi. 100 years pass, and someone decides to pull the sword from the stone, releasing the terrible darkness of Orochi over the land of Nippon. The guardian spirit of Kamiki village, Sakuya, awakens Amaterasu within a statue memorializing Shiranui, and she pretty much just asks you to go slay the big lizard over yonder, and you're joined up with Isun, who pretty much plays the role of Amaterasu's mouthpiece and comic relief throughout the game. Isun is a tiny bug-like creature, but also a wandering artist, and his goal is to master all 13 of the celestial brush techniques. As of right now, he only knows one, Rejuvenation, which repairs things in the environment. These brush techniques were passed down to Amaterasu's 13 children or lesser gods of sorts, all with their own specialties. These brush techniques are equivalent to the weapons and items you would find in Legend of Zelda. Like one of the powers you get from one of the nature triplets, works kinda like Link's grappling hook. but instead you draw the line from Okami to your grapple point. Your techniques range from things like a big slash that can cut through trees and stones and any monster in your way, to being able to change the time of day just with a little ink. It's kind of hard for me to articulate how cool it is to draw a line through something and just see it get slashed, or to draw a bomb on the screen and see a little bomb appear just to blow up on a little imp's face. It just feels really cool to do. And one of the first things you really notice about this game is just how beautiful it looks. The game has this stunning painterly style with these thick black outlines and these pastel saturated colors that really harkens back to classical Japanese painting. This wholly unique look ended up porting really well to modern consoles. Just polishing these textures and bumping up the resolution really made this game pop on modern hardware. You probably wouldn't think just by looking at it that this game is nearly 2 decades old. Like I mentioned earlier, the game's design is heavily inspired by Zelda. The way its dungeons work play out almost exactly like a Zelda game. You use your brush techniques to solve puzzles, get into a few scrapes along the way, fight a boss that ends up feeling more like a puzzle than a test of your combat ability. The boss fights still grade your combat skill, but what would you expect from the man who made Devil May Cry? The combat itself is also a step up over Zelda. I know, the guy known for making some of the best action games of all time made a game with good action? Extremely shocking. I really enjoy Okami's weapon system. Each weapon acts differently, whether it's equipped as a sub-weapon or a main weapon. Like the shield that you start with works as a basic melee weapon, but if you equip it as a sub-weapon, you can use it to block and parry attacks, and if you time it just right, you get a really cool finishing move. Or the beads that act as a whip when equipped as a main weapon, or a projectile as your sub-weapon. It just adds a little extra depth to combat. Also, the way your brush techniques interact with enemies add a little extra spice to an already exquisite dish. Like how your slash can destroy some enemy weapons or cut off wings of some flying enemies. But it becomes more integral when you get to the more elemental enemies like the flaming wheel, where you have to use your divine wind to blow out the flames and leave them open to attack. Or if you get both the flame and ice wheels, you can use the flames and melt the ice. It's just really good. It really makes you want to experiment to see what brush techniques work best against different foes. The game also has a light RPG element with its praise system. Since you are a god, you do like to be praised. And the easiest ways to gain praise is by clearing out these sometimes optional combat sections called demon gates, often clearing out corruption in the environment and letting the area bloom. By feeding animals, doing little side quests, or just restoring parts of nature throughout Nippon. Then you use the praise you've gained to either improve your health, your ink capacity, letting you use more of your abilities more often, increase the size of your wallet, or gain extra life pouches. I really like how this system makes you engage with the environment in different ways. It makes you feel like you're not just fighting this nebulous darkness, but helping the world heal and blossom and grow. It's just nice, man. The game's narrative is also really solid. The game is almost broken up into chapters, but the game won't tell you that. I honestly only recorded the first chapter of the game, which is like 10 hours. Each of these chapters almost feel like a full Zelda game unto themselves. The second act almost feeling like a sequel, where it expands, you go to the capital, you find new monsters to fight, new bosses, new dungeons, and more of the world unfolds. But that first act wraps up rather nicely with the whole final battle with Orochi. The writing of the game is really good. The comedy hit more than I remembered. It's not a gutbuster by any means, but I did chuckle more often than I thought I would. In this first act, where Orochi's corruption wreaks havoc through the land, you find one of Nagi's descendants, Susanoo, a sort of dull, lazy, middle-aged guy, just kind of putzing around Kamiki Village, just kind of coasting off of Nagi's name, but he gets forced into adventure alongside of Amaterasu. Susanoo, while being kind of a comic relief character, does have some growth through his journey, becoming a hero in his own way, even if Ami does most of the heavy lifting, if you ask me. And this final act finishes with this big climactic battle between Orochi, Susanoo, and yourself. And yes, the game does build it up as this big, final climactic battle. The game follows through with that. The fight is big, cinematic, bombastic. It does almost feel like a final boss fight. And right when you think the credits are about to roll, the game goes, nah, why don't you start exploring that way? We got more to show you. And that's pretty much where my recent playthrough ends. mostly because this video needed to come out eventually, but there's still a couple more acts which all feel like full Zelda games of their own. But that first act,
The best.
while the rest of the game is still great, that first act, definitely a masterpiece. Now we've come to the part where I usually give my complaints about a game. So if I had to say anything bad about Okami, it's that none of its cutscenes are skippable. The simlish noises the characters make as the text rolls out can be kind of annoying. And lastly, Hideki Kamiya is always horny on main. Like, why are Sakuya's assets out at all times? But this isn't very surprising when you remember that this guy made Bayonetta right after this. But that's literally the only bad things I could say about this game. Okami is a masterpiece, and it's not just one of the best Zelda-like games of all time, it's probably one of the best games of all time. And in my humble opinion, better than any Zelda game ever made. I feel like I should follow the rule of thirds and talk about a third game, but this video's already gone on for too long in my opinion, so here's an honorable mention instead. Journey to the Savage Planet. It too is an underappreciated gem, it has a lot of exploration and puzzles, but it more neatly fits as a Metroid Prime clone than a Zelda-like game. It hits the same puzzle and exploration itch at least. Just like Darksiders got a sequel announced at Gamescom this past year, which means now is a perfect time to pick up the game and prepare yourself for the sequel. And also I hope that new announcement helps with that SEO baby! I just wanted to end this video saying that if you prefer the Zelda games to these obviously superior games, it's okay, I accept you for who you are. And despite all the jokes at Zelda's expense, I do think they're great games, and I'm not trying to lessen your experience with them. I just wanted to talk about these games that I genuinely enjoyed, and actually helped me appreciate Zelda in a different way, even if I didn't quite get on with the games. I can totally see how Zelda's design can be extremely compelling. That mix of combat, puzzle solving, and exploration is extremely engaging. That design is almost timeless now, and I can totally see how so many people have fallen in love with Zelda throughout the years. I also see the beauty in other teams taking this tried and true formula and creating something special and unique with it. I don't think these Zelda-like games are any less of a fantastic game just because they were inspired by something else. They're all fantastic pieces of art that stand on their own and just have a special place in my heart, and I wanted to talk about it. Thank you so much for watching. This video is a rather chonky one, and hopefully if you've made it this far, you enjoyed it. And if you did like it, why not hit that like button, subscribe, maybe even click that little bell icon so you won't miss any future uploads. Thank you again for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.